A landscape photo can be defined by anything, any number of different elements. The light, the sky, the mountains in front of you, the narrative, the path you took to find that place. But what truly makes a photo stand out compared to all the rest? Today, let's start to answer that question. From the first moments I spent with a camera, I have been so drawn to landscapes. First small in waterfalls and streams and forest scenes, but eventually into the grand scenes that seem to come alive as the elements encompass them. There's something so electric about a changing scene, weather bringing an electricity into the entire world as it's seen in front of you, and watching that, trying your best to capture that. Now, as I grew into my camera and began pursuing hobbies like mountaineering and climbing and hiking, these pursuits that ultimately encouraged me to continue using my camera, to continue growing as a narrative-focused, landscape-oriented photographer, I started finding lessons that I could marry between the two. The first lesson I learned is the first key to creating unforgettable landscape photographs, and that's that the best conditions, the best moments, the most memorable spectacles come on either side or during the biggest storms. And so as I set out with a pack on my back, a waterproof lining on the inside, and my camera wrapped in as much clothing as I could, heading out into a blustering storm, I'd find myself in places that no one else was, because ultimately it was uncomfortable to be there. I'd be soaked, I'd be far away, I'd be hungry, and I'd be cold, and then everything would open up around me. The storm would pass, the clouds would part, the light would ultimately glow in a way that only happens when a storm has recently been there. And the truth that's made most evident by the fact that I was quite frequently alone in these spaces is that the photographs coming from these moments on either side of these spectacles, on either side of these storms, is that the photos were unique. They were fleeting, they were evocative, they're filled with the emotion of an earth changing rapidly in front of you. And so my first key to unforgettable landscape photos is to run towards the storms. Spend as much time as you can in the environments that feel the most uncomfortable. Waiting under that tree, hiding in that cave, or running away from the lightning in the background, trying to ultimately position yourself somewhere spectacular such that when the storm passes, you are there to capture it, to respond to all of that changing environment around you. Chase the storm. In time, hiking turned to rock climbing, backpacking, and eventually mountaineering. And as I set off on these adventures more and more often, finding myself hidden amongst the clouds and climbing higher and higher and experiencing wild settings. I'd come home with photos to show my friends, my family, my photographic community, and they'd ask questions like, how did you take this? Were you in a plane? Were you flying a drone? How could this be possible? And over time, that taught me something very, very clear. When you seek unexpected perspectives, you ultimately capture the attention of people because it challenges their perception of what a honest or what a realistic perspective can be. The truth is that my photos were introducing them to an unfamiliar perspective, one they couldn't imagine themselves being in, and that window intrigued them. And in asking those questions, they taught me something very, very important. There's so much value to the unexpected perspective. And if you have people asking you, how did you take this photo? If you have people intrigued in that perspective and how it could possibly exist, you're doing something right. So my second key to unforgettable landscape photos is the idea that the unexpected perspective, the effort it takes to create or find that unexpected perspective, it will ultimately propel your photos past the vast swath of normality in photography, of normal perspectives that most people are only capable of finding. If you ultimately make the effort to seek out that unexpected perspective, you differentiate yourself, you add intrigue, you ultimately encourage your viewers to ask questions. How could this be possible? What pursuit ultimately led to this perspective? And you've captured attention. Your photos now stand out. I'd like to quickly add that all of the points I'm covering today are more or less hand-pulled out of my ebook, an introduction to photographic storytelling that I'm planning to release in roughly the next month or so. I'd like to get it out before Christmas. This is a book I've been working on for months, and I'm really, really proud of it. It's going to be about 150 pages of what I believe are my most important techniques and lessons that go into creating compelling photos. Now, it's oriented towards landscapes, but really it focuses on just the photographic process in general, and I believe it translates well to whatever your photographic interest may be. And I'd love it if you guys, let me know if you're interested. The best way you can do that is by signing up for my newsletter down below. This is how you'll know when the book is released, and by being on that newsletter, I'll immediately have a 50% off for everybody. What started as a fixation on the landscapes in front of me gradually began to change as my pursuits focused on travel through them. Suddenly, I was focusing on the path I was taking through these landscapes, how the light looked when I was there, how the weather was affecting our travel, how the scene and the setting would ultimately change as we traveled through it and, challenge us, push us. And so suddenly my photos took on a bit of a narrative-based orientation. And over time, it became clear that that allowed the people looking at my photos to see into them as if through a window. They were beginning to engross themselves in the narrative, taking interest in those little elements that built a story into that landscape. Now, the landscape itself was beautiful, but there's countless beautiful landscapes out there. And introducing that sense of dialogue, introducing that personality that a narrative ultimately can cultivate, it gave them more to be interested in, more footing to put themselves in the photo. And ultimately, that holds interest, and that makes a photo more memorable. So my third and final key to unforgettable landscape photos is to go into each photo with a narrative intent. Try to tell a story. We're not trying to take photos simply of things. We're not trying to depict a landscape. We're trying to depict the narrative that that landscape exists within, or that that landscape is creating. Between the light, the weather, even the soil in front of you, there is always a story to be found. And if you take the time to seek it out, to build that narrative for the people that are viewing your photos, you give them an opportunity to enter that frame, to live that story with you for even just a moment. And that extra moment of attention that you've earned through creating a narrative in your photos, that takes your photos to a whole new level. As photographers that ultimately want our photos to capture the attention of our viewers, that want to grow in our ability to create something that's evocative and compelling, we have to look for ways to differentiate ourselves. Now, composition can take us a long ways, and we can make a good, clean, beautiful photograph, and I would say that that's essential. It is. But once we get past these basics, while always continuing to practice them, we need to start looking for that next step. And I believe that these 3 keys are a great next step. It's to start looking at the weather and finding when a storm is coming and actually chasing it, because that storm is ultimately going to give you an opportunity for beautiful fleeting moments that otherwise don't exist if you're only looking for the best windows of weather. It means going out and looking for the unexpected perspectives, getting low, getting high, traveling into challenging environments, because those kinds of perspectives, they challenge the perception of the people that are viewing them. Finally, and perhaps the most important of all, is that every photo is an opportunity to tell a story, and every element in front of us has some kind of narrative element in it, even if it's not something that's living. If we take the time to focus on what it is that's happening around a landscape, what it is that's making that landscape compelling, rather than just taking a photo of the landscape, like a snapshot, we start to introduce narratives and dialogues and emotional resonance that our viewers can begin to envelop themselves in. It challenges them to be a part of the photograph, to put their perceptions into a window, so to speak, and look into the frame as we create it. So we need to introduce those kinds of narrative elements if we want to be as compelling as possible. These 3 keys are some of the most important that I discussed in my ebook. They're some of the most important that I live by, and I also think they're the most fun and really at the core of my photographic style. I sincerely hope they work for you, and I believe they will. I'd love to know if you guys agree with these points, if you think I'm just totally out of line with anything, or if you'd like to add anything. I'm always open to the conversations you guys are having in the comments below. I think they're awesome, and I encourage you to let me know down below. Go ahead, let's have a conversation. I'll talk to you guys soon.